So I'll sum it up at the national level. We would need a leader that can actually bring the two sides together. Somebody who has a very clear vision. You've grimaced. For anybody that's just listening to this, Ray Dalio just grimaced hard. All right, so explain the grimace, Ray.
It's like wishing for the tooth fairy or something. I mean, it's like not going to the root cause of why you don't have that leader. Okay, if you look at history, this is one of the great challenges of a democracy, and when it gets into everybody fighting for their own cause with populism, they, and so, Mussolini comes to power to make the trains run on time because it's badly managed and so on. So somebody says, give me the dictator. Give me the dictator, and then I will, and I want that dictator. So that's what we're, okay, so how do you get that leader? Okay, it increasingly, I'm just dealing with the mechanics. So so how do you get the leader? And what do you do with the opposition? Okay, it's almost like, well, you have this fighting of the various types, and do you accept losing? And then does the opposition remain and undermine everything you're trying to do? So it's almost like it gets to mob rule. That's why the dictators come to power. Okay? So that's just history, and that's all understandable, if not desirable. It's still understandable that that's the mechanics. So to wish and say, okay, we need a strong leader who will get control and make everything go all right, sounds a little bit like wishing for the tooth fairy.
That is how dictators come to power. That is very much the scenario I would want to categorically avoid. So do you see that just as that is an inevitability? Because right now, Ray, to your own point, we are not being good with each other. From what I can see, there is certainly a broadcast signal, and maybe this is a distortion of social media, but I don't think so. Certainly not given the elections of recent. There is a broadcast of a signal of massive division. In a moment of massive division, you get people fighting. In a moment where people fighting, there is a winner-take-all scenario. That's the path to dictatorship. So while my path may be wishing for the tooth fairy to want somebody who's inspiring that can unite people, I'll ask it pointedly. Do you just see it as an inevitability that we head towards dictatorship?
When you say have a leader that way, you're not dealing with the mechanistic determinants to say, how do you get a society that is splitting apart and operating in the way that I describe to have a leader that leads and people follow properly? Okay, you're skipping over that. You can't skip over that.
Do you see a path, though, other than, because the natural way that this plays out?
The only path I can see is the one that I'm referring to. If you worry about the alternative, okay? So if you worry, look at that. What is it? You must not have it. If the more people worry about that, then the more likelihood you won't have that. In other words, if you want to tilt the odds in all the different ways, I don't know, take out the ads, have conversations like this, do whatever it is and say, I worry of what's going to happen. So we must not have that. And we really must have this other alternative. I really want to buy into that other alternative. And you have somebody arguing for that other alternative, like, will you follow? And I'll tell you, the prime Mario Draghi in Italy. Let me just tell you the story very quickly of Mario Draghi in Italy. Mario Draghi used to be the head of the European Central Bank, which was like being head of the Federal Reserve for a number of years. And he and I got to know each other in that. He completed that. And he's highly, highly respected. He's Italian. And Italy has crazy anarchy. Like they've had an average of one prime minister a year, and so chaotic and so bad that all the political parties got together and said, we will be united under Mario Draghi. We will let him lead. We will turn it over to him.
Wow.
And he said, I will do that only as long as all the political parties remain united. Because if they don't remain united, we're going to get into this dysfunctional fighting, and I know it's not going to work. So for a period of 18 months, he was prime minister of Italy, and very loved. People loved him. And then one of the political parties dropped out because they disagreed on his approach for, I think it was handling Ukraine. And he said, okay, now I'm resigning, even though everybody wanted him to stay overwhelmingly. But he said, I can't govern under that kind of a fragmented environment. And, in other words, he knew where it was going to go. So he resigned. And in the period between him resigning and actually turning it over to the new prime minister, we had lunch. And we were talking about these things. And what he was describing and what exists is the issue that we're talking about, the inability of a leader to be able to lead when there's so much fragmentation. And if you look at the history of democracies, and you go back to Plato, Plato's Republic, he wrote the Plato. A lot of people think Americans invented democracy. No, it existed way back, in the Roman and Greek times and all that. And so he looked at the cycles. And what he said was, there's this cycle of these different systems. One leads to another in this way, where what happens is the greatest risk of democracy is an anarchy, because the fragments, it becomes uncontrolled. They all have their interests. They fight and they tear the thing apart. And then, so what happens after that is then you get the dictator. And you get, ideally, the benevolent dictator. In other words, the one who really knows how to make good things happen, and he cares about the country. He doesn't care about his personal wealth and those kinds of things, and they create that. And to create order that comes about that. And then in that cycle, after a period of time, you inevitably get the incompetent or selfish dictator. And then you have a revolution, and then you go to a democracy and so on, and these things go in cycles. And so when you're asking the question, of the leader, you're saying, okay, let's create a leader and have them go lead. You can't ignore the fragmentation and the inability to lead in that set of circumstances.
I agree with that. But if you, even in your own example, what you had in Mario is somebody that is able to garner the respect of all the different factions. Now, I understand that it ultimately broke apart, but he is the tooth fairy that I'm talking about. You need somebody that people can unite under.
But it didn't work because of how the people behaved with each other, and it won't work. Okay?
Yeah. Okay, so if we know that people aren't going to stay united for long. What you're saying is the duration that people can stay united is the duration that you can have that sort of peace.
How long is that duration here? I mean, let's look at the situation. I mean, it doesn't exist, let alone have a duration to it.
Yeah. Ray, you say very troubling things in a very calm manner, which I think is probably the only way to say them. You said something earlier, which I think is really important that I want to re-emphasize. What's happening now is a determination from something that happened earlier. And so to some extent, you're in a better position to deal well with the way things are, the reality. I've heard you talk a lot about that. The reality is what the reality is. You need to be awake. You need to be paying attention to that reality. And then you need to base your plan of action based on the truth of that circumstance. To do that, though, one thing I think is incredibly important is people have to be able to strip their emotions out of this. I know you're a huge proponent of meditation. How do people get good at removing emotion from the equation so that they can see reality accurately?
Well, meditation is a huge benefit for that. So I really, it gives one both a calmness and a clarity. And it gives one an ability almost to go above everything and look down on it and say, okay, here's how things work. And an acceptance of reality. It's like this serenity prayer. God, give me the serenity to accept that which I can't control. Give me the power to control that which I can, and give me the wisdom to tell the difference. And, just to be able to approach things in an open-minded way, like we talk about. You asked the question about disagreement. How can I approach disagreement? Do I emotionally get into a fight about it, or do I handle it well? Meditation and those types of things, calming yourself down, viewing everything more like think of a reality as being like a game, like a chess game. Okay, calmly. Okay, this thing happens, and what's your next move? And how does it work?
Okay, very fascinating. So if you take a chess grandmaster or anybody that's really proficient at chess and you put a chessboard in front of them, they look at the board and they don't have to analyze each individual piece. They know that pattern on the board very well. They know where you are in the game, and so that's a chunk of information. It feels like a very similar approach to the way that you're looking at financial markets, global movements, the big cycle, in that, I can drop you into a scenario. You'd look at a few key pieces of information. You'd know where we are in the cycle. So, starting with the 3 forces that we talked about at the very beginning. Hey, tell me where those 3 forces are. You expanded it to 5. But tell me where we are with those 5 forces. That's the chunk on the chessboard that I need. Boom. Now I know how to take that next move.
That's what I want to try to give to people, okay? That's why I have the animated video on YouTube. That's why I have the book, because it's like watching the same movie happen over and over again. You can see it, and you understand the cause-effect relations, so you can understand. So when you ask questions like, how do you get better? And then we deal with the mechanics of that. Like, okay, how do you get financially better off, and how do you be good with each other and not be threatened? It's just, if you look at it that way and you understand the mechanics, it is what it is. That's how reality works. And then how do you deal with it?
To hear more about Ray Dalio's warning on the upcoming recession, which we're almost certainly already in, watch the full episode here.
I look at 3 major forces that are happening now, but have happened many times in history. And those 3 major forces are